All right, Nick. So, bottom of our screen, Brian Kibler on Selesnya midrange. Excuse me, we do have these inverted. We will get that fixed. Top of the screen, Brian Kibler on Selesnya midrange. Bottom of your screen, Nicholas Sagartz on Boros Burn. So we will get that fixed, but otherwise, let's talk about the matchup here.
Right. So Brian Kibler, nothing but excitement for mono green and playing Llanowar Elves since Foundations. No Llanowar Elf here, but a different one drop, and he's looking to get the beatdown plan on early and often.
Yeah, I think this deck has really built itself to be at its peak power level when it does have that Llanowar Elf start, but very much able to function when it doesn't. And as we did see the adaptive on turn 1 getting met with a burst lightning, Brian does have the follow-up here in the Sharp-Eyed Rookie.
Yeah, and the Sharp-Eyed Rookie, similar to the adaptive, is another creature that gets to grow when you play another bigger creature. It's got Vigilance, and when you play another creature, it gets a +1/+1, and I believe you get to investigate because it's from Murders at Karlov Manor.
Yeah, now the scary part here for Brian is he did not deal with or present any sort of threat for the Emberheart Challenger, being able to block it, but that was a Screaming Nemesis follow-up for Nicholas. So Nemesis, one of the extremely powerful cards in these burn strategies, especially when it comes to creature-based strategies that have a tough time removing it from the battlefield.
Yeah, and Nicholas's deck is a little more heavy on the burn, hence the burn moniker here. Not so much a mice deck. This deck's going to be able to close out games with a burst of spells after it gets that early damage in.
All right, so we do have our overlay fixed now. We will get those cameras fixed for you, as well as a second Screaming Nemesis coming out here for Nicholas. And that was a Sharpshooter coming down from Brian. Does have reach, of course, so is presenting a blocker for the Screaming Nemesis. However, one is still getting through, and I believe Nicholas did indicate that the damage from the Nemesis was going face to Brian. So, importantly, Brian now has a pseudo emblem. We do need to get the life totals reversed, but otherwise we do have everything sorted now. It is Nicholas Sagartz at 20. Brian Kibler down to just 8 against this Boros Burn deck. A scary number when you are facing a deck that features cards like Boros Charm, able to deal damages in quantities of 4. And that's something that Brian has to be thinking about. There is a pseudo emblem on him now from that Screaming Nemesis. Brian no longer able to gain life for the remainder of this game. So that 8 is what he has to work with.
Yeah, and I don't believe Brian has much life link outside of flipping a Pelucranos in his deck anyhow. But if he was hoping to crawl back in with some life link, that would have been one of the routes. Still, Brian's sitting here holding the fort with a scrap shooter, trying to figure out what to do next in this matchup.
Yeah. Brian does need to find a Get Lost in his main deck to deal with the Screaming Nemesis. Already sitting at a precarious life total as it is at just 8, but if his only route is blocking this Nemesis and taking more damage 4 to the face, that is essentially going to be game between copies of Boros Charm as well as Burst Lightning in the list from Nicholas. It is going to be essentially trivial to deal 4 more points of damage.
Yeah, unless Nicholas just does nothing but draw some lands or creatures that Brian can block.
That are not Screaming Nemesis.
Yeah, he's going to get burned out. But the 4/4 does hold the fort here, and now here we've got Rin and the Realm Breaker.
Yeah, Ren Realmbreaker coming down, immediately ticking up to essentially animate one of the lands from Brian. That land does have Vigilance, Haste, and Hexproof until Brian's next turn, so able to present the damage. And at this point, blocking the Screaming Nemesis is actually representing more damage to you than letting it get through. And Brian recognizes that this game is now a matter of race mode, so he's going to say, shields down, your move.
Yeah, he can't win by blocking that Nemesis. So if he can find a way to close this game in a very small window, he has a chance to win by hoping that Nicholas draws a couple of bricks.
Yeah, so going back to Nicholas's side, we will see what he's got to supplement the Screaming Nemesis. It is going to be a copy of Slickshot Show Off here, and Brian going to present a blocker in the land, but Monstrous Rage on the other side, as well as the block, will be lethal, and that is game 1, blisteringly quickly, going to Nicholas Sagartz on Boros Burn.
And as you mentioned, he can block the Screaming Nemesis, but the damage is going to be dealt one way or the other with that card. Monstrous Rage on the other creature allows him to just pump through and win.
Yeah, so really we are seeing the power of the Boros Burn deck here, especially when it comes to a strategy like Selesnya midrange. We do see some decks like Dimir midrange having access to better removal to deal with it, but when you are counting on reach creatures to be your impenetrable wall, Screaming Nemesis really shows off just how much of a menace it is here.
Yeah, and Brian has shown concessions to that in his deck building. This deck could have been mono green, but he has the white splash. It's pretty easy to fit into the deck and has some get lost, but he's going to need a little bit more help because three removal spells are just not enough.
Yeah, and looking at the sideboard, that is where he is going to get that help. Specifically, 2 copies of Elspeth's Smite and 4 copies of Sheltered by Ghosts available to him. Anything else you're looking at that would really help shore up this matchup from Brian's side?
I don't see anything in particular. The Sheltered by Ghosts is going to give him that lifelink, so if he avoids taking that damage from the Screaming Nemesis, that could be a way for him to grind out a game and just disregard some of that burn, but the removal spells that are cheap and the lifelink seems key to me.
All right, so on the other side, Nicholas Sagartz, of course, taking a look at his sideboard. What are you really looking for if you are in the Boros Burn seat, trying to attack through the wall of large creatures that Brian is presenting?
Maybe the get losts, but I think when you're in this type of situation, you just want to burn them out and beat down and try to stay as streamlined as possible. I could see Torch the Towers coming in if you want some extra ways to deal with the Llanowar Elves on the draw. Those cards, the extra removal can't hurt. If he fears Brian can do some sort of long-term mid-range plan where he outlasts him, the Forge could come in as some extra threats that are just going to be there turn after turn, but I like being able to deal with the cheap creatures and then just burning them out.
How do you feel about a card like Take for a Ride in this matchup when your opponent is presenting all these large creatures? Are you looking to steal one and try to close out the game, maybe?
It's a possibility. Again, this is a day one closed deck list format, so we know that Nicholas doesn't know everything that is in Brian's deck. He might not know what the top end might be, and Brian, is pretty low to the ground, going at 3 and 4 drops as the top of his curve, so he could bring it in expecting something huge. He didn't really see, a Polukranos or anything giant. But if you're looking to just close out a game, it could be an option.
Yeah, I think that is definitely the key point that you mentioned there. Day one today, it is going to be all closed deck lists. So for us on the broadcast, we and you, the viewers at home, have the benefit of knowing exactly what is going on in these decks as well as the sideboard. The players don't have that luxury. Day 2 of this tournament will be open deck lists. For day 1, everybody is operating in the dark here. So exact numbers, what the makeup of your opponent's deck looks like, especially when you're facing something like Selesnya midrange here, which not among the most played decks in the room, maybe not something that Nicholas prepared against in his testing for this tournament, might catch you off guard exactly what cards you can expect to face between the main deck and the sideboard.
Yeah, and Kibler is known to brew, so there could be anything in this deck.
Yeah, I think you basically put the possibility of Llanowar Elf at about 200%, and then everything after that just starts cascading down from there of what do you put in a Llanowar Elf deck, and let's figure that out.
Yeah, no doubt there. You know that before he plays his first land.
All right, and here we go with the players drawing for game 2. As you can see from our overlay, Nicholas Sagartz did take game 1 on Boros Burn. Brian Kibler on Selesnya midrange down a game and has an uphill battle ahead of him. Looks like a keep for Brian and the same for Nicholas, so we are going to be kicking things off with 7 for both, and there's the signature, the Siggy itself, Llanowar Elves for Brian Kibler on turn 1.
Forced comes into play tapped, putting the Llanowar Elves in play.
Yeah. And tale as old as time. It is a shock on the other side, and this is what Brian did not want to reveal or happen here. Just another Llanowar Elves pass, so if Nicholas is able to deal with the second Llanowar Elves and Brian doesn't have that land drop, this is going to be a very quick game. So suddenly 2 removal spells, Monastery Swiftspear presenting damage as well, and let's see if Brian is able to put together a game plan here. That is a great start.
Yeah, you could see Brian laugh as that second Llanowar Elves getting caught. He knows he was caught with his pants down there with the one-lander, but found the second one. He's got his creature on board. Now we'll see how much more damage Nicholas can can generate here.
Yeah, and I believe that is a Keen-Eyed Curator coming down for Brian. So it is a decently large creature, but ultimately not going to be able to present as much of a threat as you would like, as once again, we do see Nicholas bringing down the MVP of Game 1. It is that Screaming Nemesis coming down and immediately getting into the red zone.
Yeah, and now Brian, again, is going to be thinking about how he sideboard. Did he bring in those sheltering lights? Is he going to try to rely on some life gain this game? How do you want to block? How do you want to accept the damage from the Screaming Nemesis is going to be key.
Yeah, he does opt to take the damage there, saying that if I block this and trade off the creature, then I'm turning off all of my lifelink for the game, and that is not where you want to be exactly against this Boros Burn deck. Now, Brian's side, he did find that third land, so now the game plan is truly rolling, and we do see an adaptive coming down, just a 1/1 at the moment, but more importantly, Brian is left up 2 mana, so now Get Lost is being represented on that side.
Yeah, now a whole slew of cards could come out of Brian, but Nicholas shows no fear, bashing in.
Yeah, that one menacing mana left up here representing something like a Monstrous Rage for Nicholas. So Brian has to be aware of that when considering potentially quote-unquote free blocks on this Monastery Swiftspear, and there is the Monstrous Rage. So we'll see, does Brian have the Get Lost here to try to fight against the onslaught that is being presented between the Show-Off as well as the Nemesis and the Swiftspear? There's a lot of damage coming through.
Yeah, and this is what these red decks can do, but it looks like Brian's going to get paid off here. Has the 2 mana and the Get Lost, gets a little 2-for-1 action, taking care of the Monastery Swiftspear and avoiding all that extra damage.
Yeah, so it is just six damage coming through here, but that is Brian going down to 9 life, so it is still a scary spot. He is absolutely not out of it. Ultimately, the best draw from Brian would definitely be one of those copies of Sheltered by Ghosts that we saw in the sideboard. If he has one of those, that could swing this game completely, being able to answer the Screaming Nemesis and get a big lifelink attack in while the shields are down from Nicholas.
Yeah, we'll see what he's got here. We know he's got plenty of action in his hand. You know, he didn't have a second land, so we know his hand is full of action. He drew the lands off the top, so now it's up to Brian to find a way to get out of this.
Yeah, because at 9 life, you are in a precarious spot. 2 cards in hand, it looks like, for Nicholas. And he is on 3 lands. He was on 3 lands the previous turn as well. So pretty reasonable for Brian to assume that Nicholas is on a decent amount of action here.
He also has to keep in mind those map tokens can grow the creatures on the other side, but looks like we've got the Scrap Shooter.
Yeah, we do see that come down here. Scrap Shooter comes onto the board 4/4. It is going to evolve the adaptive, essentially putting another oil counter on it. That is a 2/2. So 5 damage coming across from Brian, once again getting aggressive, but Brian is not in a great spot here. A gust of wind could blow away this game here, and another Show-Off. Not exactly what you want to see, as we do see the block, and a Boros Charm here would do it from Nicholas. Lightning Helix as well is 9 damage, and the Handshake from Brian Kibler. So that is Nicholas Sagartz in incredibly impressive fashion, taking things down game 1 and 2 with Boros Burn.
Burn doing what Burn does. Early creatures get you low. Sure, Brian's able to put a couple creatures on the board, but with the burn spells and the pump spells in hand, it doesn't matter. You've got good blocks that look like good blocks, but even with that Get Lost taking care of the Monastery Swiftspear, not enough.